The real power appears in the moment you manage to pause. There is a quiet moment that decides more about your life than most people realize. It is a small pause, a single breath before you speak, a brief hesitation before you react, a second of awareness before you spend money, before you believe a thought, before you let a mood take over your entire day. This audiobook is about reclaiming control over 4 forces that often push life off its track. Your mouth, your mind, your mood, and your money. When the mouth is out of control, one careless sentence can damage a relationship that took years to build. You say something in the heat of a moment, and the words travel faster than your wisdom. Later, you replay the scene in your head and wish you had chosen silence instead. When the mind is out of control, a single thought can invent an entire disaster that does not even exist. You imagine rejection before it happens. You assume failure before you try. You turn a small mistake into a story about how everything is going wrong. When your mood is out of control, one burst of anger can hijack an entire day. A small irritation in the morning becomes tension at work, distance in conversations, and exhaustion by night. Your emotions start steering the wheel while your better judgment sits quietly in the passenger seat. And when money is out of control, spending becomes a way to soothe emotions. A difficult day turns into online shopping. Stress becomes a new purchase. Boredom becomes another transaction. And later, the bill arrives with a quiet companion called anxiety. But something remarkable happens when you begin to regain control of these 4 areas. You start speaking less, but saying exactly what matters. You think less chaotically, but with more clarity. You remain calmer when life tries to provoke you, and you begin using money to build your future instead of patching emotional fires in the present. Decades ago, there was a small habit practiced by Abraham Lincoln that illustrates this idea with surprising precision. Whenever he felt angry and wanted to criticize someone harshly, he would sit down and write a letter. In that letter, he would pour out every frustration, every accusation, every raw emotion he felt in that moment. The words were intense, direct, and completely honest. Then he would fold the letter and set it aside. He would wait. Hours later, sometimes days later, he would read it again. And more often than not, he would simply write a short note on the letter. Never sent, never signed. Then he would leave it exactly where it was, unsent forever. This quiet practice captured something powerful. He controlled his mouth by delaying his words. He controlled his mind by refusing to trust the dramatic story, forming in the heat of emotion. He controlled his mood by giving anger time to cool down. And by doing so, he avoided many impulsive decisions that emotional storms often produce. Inspired by the New York Times, The Lost Art of the Unsent Angry Letter. A small pause, a powerful shift. Throughout the chapters that follow, you will explore 12 practical principles that help you regain that pause. Because the deepest freedom does not come from controlling the world around you. It comes from learning how to control the moment before you react. Chapter 1. Pause. 1 moment before you speak. Think about the last argument you had that left a bitter taste afterward. Not the loud part, not the moment when voices rose, but the quiet moment later when you replayed the conversation in your mind. That moment when a particular sentence returns and you wish you could take it back. Most people do not regret staying silent in an argument. They regret speaking too quickly. They regret the words that escaped before wisdom had time to arrive. This is why the first principle of controlling your mouth begins with something surprisingly small. Before you speak, pause for a moment and choose your direction. That pause may last only a second, but it changes everything. Without a pause, speaking becomes a reflex. Someone provokes you, and the reaction fires instantly. The words come out sharp, defensive, exaggerated. But when you pause, even briefly, the automatic reaction is interrupted. In that tiny space, something powerful appears. Choice. The pause cuts the chain between stimulus and response. Instead of reacting, you begin deciding. Do you want to escalate the situation or calm it? Do you want to prove a point or preserve the relationship? Do you want to release frustration or speak something that moves the conversation forward? That single moment of delay reduces unnecessary words, and it prevents the poisonous ones that tend to appear when emotion is driving the conversation. Imagine a simple scene that many people know well. You receive a message that irritates you. Perhaps a colleague criticizes your work. Perhaps a friend writes something that feels unfair. You read the message, and your body reacts immediately. Your fingers move quickly across the keyboard. The reply forms itself with surprising speed. The tone is sharp. The message is ready. You are one tap away from sending it. Now imagine something different happens. You stop. Just for a moment. You read the message again, but this time more slowly. You notice the heat inside your chest beginning to settle. Suddenly, the reply you wrote no longer feels necessary. You delete half the words, then you rewrite the message with calm clarity. Or sometimes you do something even wiser. You decide not to send anything yet. That small pause has already changed the outcome of the entire interaction. Conversations, relationships, even careers have been shaped by moments exactly like this. The good news is that this skill can be practiced with something very simple. Use the 10-second rule before sending a message or responding in a tense moment. When you feel the urge to answer immediately, count slowly to 10. During those seconds, do nothing except breathe and read the situation again. Ask yourself a quiet question. What result do I actually want from this conversation? Those 10 seconds give your mind time to step back from emotion. They allow clarity to arrive before your words do. At first, it may feel strange to wait before responding, especially in a world that rewards instant replies. But over time, this habit becomes a form of strength. You speak with intention instead of impulse. And people notice the difference. Because sometimes the most powerful thing you can say in a heated moment is nothing at all. Silence at the right moment can save an entire relationship. Chapter 2. Speak clearly, not excessively. Have you ever explained something carefully, using many words, only to discover that the other person completely misunderstood you? This experience happens more often than people expect. You speak for several minutes, you add details, examples, explanations, and yet the listener walks away with the wrong idea. The problem is rarely intelligence. The problem is clarity. Many people believe that speaking more will create better understanding. In reality, the opposite is often true. The second principle of controlling your mouth is simple. One idea, one sentence, one goal. When communication is focused, understanding becomes easier. When words multiply without structure, confusion grows quietly in the background. Clarity works because it removes space for interpretation. When you express a message in a direct way, the listener knows exactly what matters. This reduces misunderstanding, prevents unnecessary conflict, and strengthens your credibility. People trust those who communicate clearly. They know what you mean. They know what you expect. They know what action should follow. Think about a common situation in the workplace. A manager asks a team member to handle a task, but explains it in a vague way. The instructions are long, scattered, and full of general statements. The employee leaves the conversation uncertain but does not want to ask too many questions. A few days later, the result appears completely wrong. Frustration follows on both sides. The manager thinks the employee ignored the instructions. The employee believes the instructions were never clear in the first place. Now, imagine the same situation handled differently. The instruction is short and precise. Please finish the report by Friday afternoon. Focus only on the client data from the last quarter. Send it directly to me before the meeting. The message contains one clear idea and one clear objective. Suddenly, the task becomes easy to understand and easy to execute. This is the power of speaking with clarity instead of volume. If you want to practice this principle, try a simple question before you speak. Ask yourself two things. What do I want this person to understand? What do I want this person to do? When you answer those questions in your mind first, your words become sharper and more purposeful. You no longer fill space with unnecessary explanations. You guide the conversation toward a clear result. Over time, this habit transforms the way people listen to you. They stop searching for the meaning hidden inside your sentences. They hear it immediately, because clear communication sends a quiet message of respect. It tells the other person that their time, attention, and understanding matter. And in communication, clarity is one of the most powerful forms of respect. Chapter 3. Replace judgment with observation. Think about how quickly a conversation can explode when a single phrase appears. The phrase often sounds like this: "You always do this." Or sometimes it sounds like this: "You never listen." Words like always and never are small, but they carry a powerful emotional charge. The moment someone hears them, something inside tightens. Defenses rise. The conversation stops being about solving a problem and becomes a battle about identity. Why does this happen? Because judgment attacks the person, not the behavior. When someone hears a judgment, they do not feel understood. They feel labeled. And when people feel labeled, they stop listening and start protecting themselves. This is why the third principle of controlling your mouth is simple but transformative. Describe behavior. Avoid labeling the person. Instead of defining who someone is, describe what actually happened. This shift may seem small, but it changes the emotional temperature of a conversation almost instantly. When you focus on observable actions, the other person has space to respond instead of defend. Observation invites cooperation. Judgment invites resistance. Think about two different versions of the same conversation. In the first version, tension rises quickly. One person says, "You never respect my time. You are always late." The other person immediately reacts, "That is not true. You are exaggerating." The discussion turns into an argument about character. Both sides begin collecting evidence from the past. The original issue disappears, and the relationship absorbs the damage. Now, imagine the same situation handled with observation instead of judgment. One person says, "We planned to meet at 9, and today you arrived 30 minutes later." When that happens, I feel frustrated because I arranged my schedule around this meeting. Notice the difference. No accusation about personality, no sweeping words like always or never. Just a description of what actually happened. The other person now has a very different emotional experience. Instead of feeling attacked, they hear a situation that can be addressed. "You are right. I misjudged the time this morning. I will adjust next time." The conversation stays focused on behavior instead of identity. This is the quiet power of observation. It lowers defenses and keeps communication productive. You can practice this skill with a simple exercise. Think of 3 sentences you might say during a moment of frustration. Perhaps something like, "You are so careless," or "You never pay attention," or "You always make things difficult." Now, rewrite each one as an observation. Instead of saying, "You are careless," you might say, "I noticed the report was submitted without the final section." Instead of saying, "You never pay attention," you might say, "During the meeting today, I mentioned the deadline twice and it seemed we missed it." Instead of saying, "You always make things difficult," you might say, "The plan changed again this morning and it slowed the progress of the project." When you shift from judgment to observation, the conversation becomes less about winning and more about understanding. You create space for correction, cooperation, and progress. Over time, this habit strengthens relationships because people feel respected rather than categorized. Every difficult conversation quietly asks you a question. Do you want to win the sentence? Or do you want to keep the person? Chapter 4. Catch automatic thoughts. Have you ever noticed how some mornings feel heavy the moment you open your eyes? Nothing dramatic has happened yet. The day has barely begun. And still, a thought appears quickly in your mind. Today is going to be difficult. I am already behind. I will probably mess something up again. These thoughts arrive so quickly that they feel like facts. But in many cases, they are not facts at all. They are automatic thoughts. The 4th principle of controlling your mind begins with a simple skill. Recognize the first thought before you believe it. Automatic thoughts are mental habits built over time. They appear instantly, often repeating old patterns that your brain has learned from past experiences. Many of them are distorted, exaggerated, or incomplete. Yet because they arrive so quickly, your mind often accepts them without question. The moment you learn to notice them, you begin to regain control of the steering wheel of your thinking. Imagine a small mistake during your day. Perhaps you send an email with a typo. Perhaps you forget a detail in a meeting. The event itself is minor, but an automatic thought appears almost instantly. I am terrible at this. I always make mistakes. Everyone probably noticed. Suddenly, the situation grows larger than it really is. What started as a small error becomes a story about personal failure. This is how automatic thinking quietly shapes your mood. The thought arrives first. The emotion follows. When the thought is harsh or exaggerated, the emotion often becomes anxiety, discouragement, or shame. But something interesting happens when you slow down and examine that first thought instead of automatically believing it. You begin to see the gap between reality and interpretation. The typo in the email does not prove incompetence. Forgetting a detail in a meeting does not define your ability. It simply means you are human and learning, like everyone else. Recognizing this difference changes how the mind responds. Instead of spiraling into negativity, the situation returns to its true size. The skill of catching automatic thoughts can be practiced in a very practical way. During your day, notice moments when your mood shifts suddenly. When that happens, pause and ask yourself a simple question. What thought just passed through my mind? Write it down if you can. Try to capture 3 of these thoughts during the day. Then ask another question that interrupts the automatic belief. Is this completely certain? Often the answer will be no. Sometimes you will realize the thought is only one interpretation among many possible ones. This practice does not mean ignoring problems or pretending everything is perfect. It simply means refusing to let the first thought control the entire story of your day. Over time, this awareness becomes a powerful mental skill. You stop believing every sentence that appears in your mind. You become the observer of your thoughts instead of their prisoner. And once that shift happens, your emotional world begins to feel lighter and more balanced. Because one important truth slowly becomes clear. Not every thought that appears in your mind deserves to be believed. Chapter 5. Focus on what you can control. What are you fighting against that you cannot actually control? Many people spend enormous amounts of energy battling forces that were never within their power to begin with. They worry about what others think of them. They replay conversations, hoping to change how someone perceived their words. They imagine outcomes they cannot influence and try to mentally control situations that belong to chance, timing, or other people's choices. The result is exhaustion. Not because life is impossible, but because the mind is trying to control the uncontrollable. The fifth principle of mastering your mind is to divide the world into two simple parts: the part you control and the part you do not. This idea may sound obvious, but very few people actually apply it in daily life. When the mind fails to make this distinction, anxiety grows quickly. You begin investing emotional energy into outcomes that depend on factors outside your reach. But when your focus returns to the things you truly control, something remarkable happens. Anxiety decreases and useful action increases. Your attention moves away from worry and toward effort. The mechanism behind this shift is simple. Control creates movement. Lack of control creates mental spinning. When you direct your attention toward actions that belong to you, your mind begins to engage with the present moment. Instead of hypothetical futures, you stop asking questions that cannot be answered, and you start doing things that actually improve your situation. Imagine a person at work who constantly worries about how others evaluate their performance. Every comment from a colleague feels like a hidden judgment. Every meeting becomes an emotional test. They spend hours wondering whether their manager approves of them, whether co-workers are impressed, whether someone is silently criticizing their ideas. Over time, this mental pattern drains their energy. Their focus is scattered across dozens of invisible opinions they cannot control. Now imagine a shift in perspective. Instead of obsessing about other people's judgments, this person begins focusing only on what belongs to them: the quality of their preparation, the clarity of their communication, the consistency of their effort, the way they handle feedback and continue improving. Suddenly, the mental battlefield becomes smaller and clearer. The opinions of others may still exist, but they no longer dominate the mind. The person's energy now flows toward actions that produce real progress. Their work improves because their attention is finally aimed at something useful. You can practice this principle with a very simple exercise. Take a sheet of paper and draw 2 columns. In the first column, write the title, Things I Control. In the second column, write, Things I Do Not Control. Begin listing situations from your current life. Perhaps you cannot control the mood of your boss, the economy, the weather, or the past mistakes someone else made. But you can control how you prepare for tomorrow, how you respond to criticism, how you manage your time today, and how you treat people during difficult moments. Once your list is complete, choose one action from the column of control. Just one. Do it today. That small step brings your attention back to where your power actually lives. Life becomes much lighter when you stop trying to command the wind. Your real strength appears when you learn to adjust the sail. Chapter 6. Reprogram your self-talk with short sentences. Take a moment to notice how you speak to yourself during difficult moments. When something goes wrong, when a challenge appears, when you face a task that feels uncomfortable, What is the tone of the voice inside your mind? Is it the voice of an ally who supports you? Or the voice of a harsh critic that weakens you before you even begin? Many people would never speak to a friend the way they speak to themselves. Yet this inner conversation happens all day, quietly shaping the direction of your thoughts, your emotions, and your decisions. This is why the sixth principle focuses on something that seems invisible but is extremely powerful. Your self-talk must be short, clear, and supportive of action. Long internal speeches rarely help. When the mind becomes filled with complicated explanations, it often drifts toward doubt, hesitation, and overthinking. But a short sentence can cut through that noise. A clear sentence gives the mind direction. It becomes a small instruction that guides your behavior instead of weakening it. The mechanism behind this principle is simple. Your self-talk creates the mental climate in which your decisions are made. If the climate is full of criticism and fear, hesitation grows naturally. If the climate is supportive and focused, action becomes easier. Imagine trying to work in a room filled with cold air and strong wind. Your body tenses, your movements slow down, and everything feels harder than it should. Now imagine working in a calm environment where the air is steady and comfortable. Your body relaxes, your attention improves, and tasks feel more manageable. Your inner voice works the same way. It quietly shapes the atmosphere of your mind. To see this principle in action, imagine standing at the beginning of a difficult task. Perhaps you are about to start a challenging project, speak in front of a group, or have a conversation that requires courage. In that moment, two different kinds of self-talk may appear. The first voice might say something like this: "I am not ready for this. I might fail. I will probably embarrass myself." These sentences create tension before anything has even happened. Now imagine a different voice. A short, steady sentence appears. Start with the first step. Stay calm and focus on the next action. These sentences do not pretend the task is easy. They simply guide your mind toward movement instead of paralysis. That is the power of effective self-talk. It does not create fantasy confidence. It creates practical direction. You can begin practicing this skill with a very small commitment. Choose one sentence that supports the way you want to act during the next week. Keep it simple and concrete. It might be something like this: one step at a time, or perhaps, do the next useful thing, or even, calm mind, steady action. Repeat this sentence whenever you face resistance or hesitation. Let it become a mental anchor that pulls your attention back to action. Over time, your brain begins to recognize this pattern. The sentence becomes familiar. It appears automatically when challenges arise. Instead of spiraling into self-criticism, your mind moves toward progress. Eventually, you will realize something important. The voice you hear most often in life is your own. You hear it more than any teacher, friend, or mentor. That is why shaping that voice carefully matters so much. Because when your inner voice becomes steady and trustworthy, it becomes one of the strongest forms of support you will ever have. You hear your own voice more than anyone else's. Make sure it is a voice you can trust. Chapter 7. Breathe to cool down, not to escape. Have you ever noticed how anger can suddenly take control of your body? One moment you are calm. The next moment your chest tightens, your voice rises, and your thoughts begin moving faster than your judgment. It feels almost like a car whose brakes have failed. Once the emotion starts accelerating, it becomes difficult to slow it down. Words come out sharper than you intended. Decisions appear faster than your wisdom can guide them. Later, when the moment passes, you look back and wonder why everything escalated so quickly. The answer often lies in something simple and physical. When emotion rises, your breathing changes. It becomes faster, shallower, and uneven. Your body enters a state of alert, preparing to defend itself or attack. The seventh principle of emotional control begins with a skill that reconnects the body and the mind. When emotions become intense, return to your breathing before returning to your words. This does not mean breathing to avoid the situation or escape the conversation. It means using breath to stabilize your nervous system so that you can respond with clarity instead of reacting with impulse. The mechanism behind this principle is deeply connected to the way the body regulates stress. When breathing becomes rapid and shallow, the nervous system interprets the situation as a threat. Your body prepares for conflict. Heart rate increases, muscles tighten, and your attention narrows toward the perceived danger. But when you slow your breathing deliberately, the opposite signal is sent. The nervous system begins to calm. Your heart rate settles. Your thinking becomes clearer. The emotional intensity starts to drop. This change may sound subtle, but it can completely transform how a conversation unfolds. Imagine a tense meeting at work. Two colleagues disagree strongly about a project. Voices begin to sharpen. Interruptions appear, and the atmosphere in the room becomes heavy. One person feels the heat rising in their chest. Their instinct is to respond immediately and defend their position. Instead, they pause and take a slow breath through the nose. Then another. The rhythm of breathing begins to slow the body. The urge to interrupt fades slightly. A few seconds later, they respond. But the tone is calmer. The words are measured rather than explosive. Suddenly, the entire direction of the meeting changes. Sometimes, the difference between conflict and resolution is simply the rhythm of a few breaths taken at the right moment. You can practice this skill with a short exercise that takes less than a minute. Before any important conversation or phone call, pause and focus on your breathing for 60 seconds. Inhale slowly through your nose for 4 seconds. Allow your lungs to fill naturally. Then exhale gently for 4 seconds. Repeat this rhythm several times. As you do this, allow your shoulders to relax and your jaw to soften. You may notice that your thoughts become less rushed. Your body begins to feel steadier. When you start the conversation after this brief pause, your tone will likely be calmer and your attention more focused. Over time, this practice becomes automatic. Whenever emotion begins to rise, your mind remembers to return to the breath. You create a small space between the feeling and the reaction. Inside that space, wiser choices become possible. Many people believe calmness is something a person either has or does not have, like a personality trait you are born with. In reality, calmness is something you practice. It is a skill you build through awareness and repetition. The breath becomes the doorway back to balance whenever emotions try to take control. Calm is not a personality trait. It is a skill you can train. Chapter 8. Separate emotion from action. Have you ever noticed how quickly a feeling can turn into behavior? You feel angry, and the words leave your mouth before you even think. You feel discouraged, and suddenly the work you plan to do disappears from your schedule. You feel hurt, and you withdraw without explaining anything. For many people, the sequence feels automatic. Emotion appears, and action follows immediately. It feels natural, almost unavoidable. Yet this pattern quietly gives emotions more control over your life than they deserve. The eighth principle of emotional mastery begins with a simple distinction. Emotions are allowed to exist, but actions must be chosen. Feeling something is human. Acting on every feeling is not necessary. The moment you learn to separate these two things, a powerful form of freedom begins to appear. The mechanism behind this idea is easier to understand than it first seems. Emotions are signals. They are internal messages telling you that something matters, something hurts, something feels uncertain, or something feels exciting. But signals are not instructions. They are information. When the mind forgets this difference, emotions become commands. Anger commands you to attack. Fear commands you to avoid. Frustration commands you to quit. But when you remember that emotions are signals rather than orders, you regain the ability to decide what happens next. This is the moment when impulse loses its power. You are no longer a passenger inside your emotional reactions. You become the driver again. Imagine a familiar situation. You are working on something difficult. Progress is slow. The task feels frustrating, and a thought appears. This is pointless. I should just stop. The emotion behind that thought is discouragement. In the past, you might have obeyed it immediately. The computer closes, the notebook disappears, and the day moves in another direction. But now, imagine something different happens. Instead of reacting automatically, you pause and recognize the emotion. You say quietly to yourself, "I feel frustrated right now." That recognition creates a small distance between the feeling and the decision. You acknowledge the emotion without letting it control the outcome. Then you ask a second question. What action would move me one step in the right direction? The answer might be small. Write one more paragraph. Review one more page. Work for 5 more minutes. Suddenly the situation changes. The frustration is still present, but it no longer determines your behavior. You continue moving forward even while the emotion exists. This is what emotional maturity often looks like in real life. Not the absence of difficult feelings, but the ability to choose actions that align with your values despite those feelings. You can strengthen this skill with a short mental reminder whenever emotions become intense. Use a 2-part sentence. First, ask yourself, what am I feeling right now? Name the emotion as clearly as possible. Perhaps it is anger, disappointment, anxiety, or fatigue. Then follow with a second question. What action will I choose next? Notice the difference between the 2 parts. The first acknowledges the emotional experience. The second restores your authority over your behavior. Over time, this practice becomes a powerful habit. Emotions still appear because emotions are part of being human. But they no longer control every decision. You learn to listen to feelings without becoming controlled by them. And gradually, something important becomes clear. Emotional strength does not mean hiding what you feel. It means choosing how you act while you feel it. True maturity is not the ability to suppress emotions. It is the ability to choose your actions in their presence. Chapter 9. Healthy boundaries protect your energy. Have you ever felt exhausted after dealing with certain people, yet somehow you end up blaming yourself instead of the situation? You leave a conversation feeling drained, frustrated, or overwhelmed. But instead of questioning what happened, you quietly tell yourself that you should have handled it better. This pattern is surprisingly common. Many people carry emotional fatigue caused by others, yet they direct the frustration inward. The real issue often has nothing to do with weakness or personality. It has to do with boundaries. The 9th principle of emotional stability is simple but powerful. Clear boundaries protect emotional balance. Without boundaries, your energy becomes available to anyone who demands it. And when your energy is constantly pulled in different directions, peace becomes difficult to maintain. Boundaries are not walls that isolate you from people. They are guidelines that protect your time, your attention, and your emotional well-being. They help others understand where your responsibilities end and where theirs begin. The mechanism behind boundaries is deeply connected to emotional stability. When boundaries are unclear, people begin to cross them without realizing it. Requests become expectations. Expectations become pressure. Pressure becomes resentment. Over time, you may feel overwhelmed, but because nothing was clearly defined, the situation continues repeating itself. On the other hand, when boundaries are communicated clearly, something changes immediately. People understand what is acceptable and what is not. Your emotional environment becomes more stable because your limits are respected. Imagine someone who constantly agrees to help others, even when they are already overwhelmed. A colleague asks for assistance with a task that should have been completed earlier. A friend asks for time and attention during a busy week. A family member expects immediate availability for every small issue. This person says yes repeatedly, even when their schedule is already full. At first, it seems generous, but gradually exhaustion appears. Stress builds quietly in the background. Eventually, the person begins to feel resentful toward the very people they wanted to help. Now imagine the same person learning a simple skill, saying no when necessary. The first time feels uncomfortable. The voice may shake slightly, but the message is clear and respectful. I cannot take on that task today. My schedule is already full. Or perhaps, I would like to help, but I need to finish my own priorities first. At first, the change feels small, yet the effect on their life becomes significant. Their time becomes more manageable. Their energy returns. Conversations feel lighter because resentment is no longer accumulating silently. You can begin practicing healthy boundaries with a very small step. Choose one simple boundary in your life right now. It might involve work, time, or emotional availability. Communicate that boundary clearly once. You do not need long explanations or complicated defenses. A calm and direct sentence is enough. Then commit to respecting that boundary for the next 7 days. During that time, notice how your energy changes. Notice how your emotional state becomes steadier. Boundaries are often misunderstood. Many people fear that setting limits will push others away. In reality, the opposite is usually true. Healthy boundaries make relationships more balanced and respectful. They allow connection without exhaustion. They allow generosity without resentment. When you know where you stand, you can meet others without losing yourself in the process. Boundaries do not create distance between you and people. Chapter 10. See money as a mirror, not as pain relief. Before buying something, ask yourself a quiet question. Do I actually need this, or am I trying to feel better? Many purchases are not driven by necessity. They are driven by emotion. After a stressful day, buying something feels like relief. After a disappointment, spending money feels like comfort. After boredom or loneliness, shopping becomes a distraction. For a brief moment, the purchase seems to lift your mood. But this emotional relief rarely lasts. The 10th principle of financial self-control begins with a simple understanding. Do not use money to treat emotions. Money can solve practical problems. It can buy tools, time, experiences, and opportunities. But when money becomes a substitute for emotional comfort, it quietly creates a cycle that drains both your finances and your peace of mind. The mechanism behind emotional spending is subtle but powerful. When you feel uncomfortable emotions such as stress, sadness, or frustration, the brain searches for something that provides immediate relief. Buying something new produces a short burst of excitement. The purchase creates a temporary sense of reward. For a few minutes, the mind feels lighter. But later something else appears. The bill arrives. The excitement fades. The object you bought often loses its emotional value, and the uncomfortable feeling that started the purchase may still remain. Now the mind carries two burdens instead of one: the original emotion and the financial consequence. This pattern can quietly repeat itself. Emotion leads to spending. Spending leads to guilt. Guilt creates more emotional discomfort, and the cycle begins again. Imagine a familiar situation. You have had a difficult day. Perhaps work felt overwhelming. Perhaps a conversation left you feeling unappreciated. In the evening, you open a shopping website or walk through a store. A new item catches your attention. It promises comfort, excitement, or novelty. You tell yourself it is a small reward after a hard day. You make the purchase. For a moment, the decision feels satisfying, but later, when the package arrives or the bank statement appears, the feeling changes. The purchase no longer carries the emotional relief you expected. Instead, it becomes a reminder of an impulse decision. This experience is more common than many people admit. The good news is that emotional spending can be interrupted with a very simple habit. Use the 24-hour rule for every non-essential purchase. When you feel the urge to buy something that is not necessary, wait one full day before completing the purchase. During that time, step away from the situation. Allow the emotional moment to settle. The next day, return to the question calmly: do I still want this? And does it truly add value to my life? Very often the answer changes after the emotional wave passes. What felt urgent yesterday now feels optional. This simple pause protects both your financial health and your emotional clarity. Over time, you begin to see money differently. Instead of using it as a tool for emotional escape, you begin using it as a mirror. Your spending reflects your priorities, your discipline, and your long-term vision. And eventually, one important truth becomes clear. Chapter 11. A budget is a map, not a prison. Many people feel uncomfortable the moment they hear the word budget. The word itself often creates an image of restriction. It sounds like limitation, control, or sacrifice. Some imagine a life where every purchase must be questioned and every small pleasure must be denied. Because of this belief, many people avoid budgeting altogether. They prefer freedom, even if that freedom later turns into financial stress. But the 11th principle invites you to see budgeting in a completely different way. A budget is not a prison, it is a map. It does not exist to limit your life. It exists to guide your decisions before problems appear. A budget is simply a plan you create in advance, so that you do not regret your choices later. The mechanism behind budgeting is based on a simple psychological truth. Decisions made ahead of time reduce the power of temptation in the moment. When money sits in your account without a plan, every purchase becomes a new decision. And every new decision requires discipline. But when you have already decided how your money will be used, the pressure disappears. You no longer argue with yourself in the store or online. The decision has already been made calmly and intentionally. This process does not remove freedom. In fact, it increases it. Because when your spending follows a clear plan, financial anxiety begins to fade. Imagine someone who decides to track every expense for the first time. At first, the process feels uncomfortable. Numbers reveal habits that were previously invisible. Small purchases add up in surprising ways. But something interesting happens after a few weeks. Awareness grows. The person begins to understand where their money truly goes. They see patterns that were hidden before. With this awareness, they start making small adjustments, A few unnecessary subscriptions disappear. Impulsive purchases decrease. A portion of income begins moving towards savings. None of these changes require dramatic sacrifice. They simply require clarity. Over time, the results become powerful. Stress about money decreases because the future no longer feels uncertain. Progress becomes visible, and that sense of control brings a quiet confidence that was missing before. You can begin building this clarity with a very simple method. Imagine dividing your money into 3 envelopes. The first envelope represents essentials: housing, food, transportation, and necessary responsibilities. The second envelope represents the future: savings, investments, and emergency funds that protect your long-term stability. The third envelope represents controlled enjoyment. This is the money you allow yourself to spend on experiences, hobbies, and small rewards without guilt. Each envelope has a clear purpose. When you follow this structure, spending becomes intentional rather than chaotic. You know exactly where your money is going and why. The idea of budgeting no longer feels restrictive. It feels empowering, because financial freedom rarely begins with large amounts of money. It begins with clear awareness and deliberate decisions. True financial freedom always starts with clarity. Chapter 12. Automate to defeat instinct. Have you ever wondered why you clearly know you should save money, yet somehow the savings never actually happen? You understand the logic. You know that preparing for the future is important. You may even promise yourself that this month will be different. Yet when the end of the month arrives, the savings account remains almost unchanged. The problem is rarely knowledge. The problem is relying too much on willpower. Willpower is useful, but it is also fragile. It becomes weaker when you are tired, stressed, or distracted. This is why the 12th principle of financial control introduces a smarter approach. Do not rely on motivation. Build systems instead. When a system is designed well, it quietly supports the behavior you want, without requiring constant effort. The mechanism behind automation is powerful because it removes the moment of temptation. When you must decide every time whether to save money, your mind begins negotiating with itself. Perhaps next month will be better. Perhaps this expense is justified. Perhaps saving can wait just a little longer. These small negotiations slowly weaken your intention, but automation changes the structure completely. When money moves automatically towards savings, the moment it arrives, there is no negotiation. The decision has already been made in advance. The system quietly protects your future from your present impulses. Imagine receiving your monthly salary and immediately seeing the full amount available in your account. The temptation to spend part of it appears almost naturally. The mind begins allocating money to different desires. But now imagine a different scenario. The moment your salary arrives, a portion of it is automatically transferred into a separate savings account. You never see it as spendable money. It quietly disappears into your future before your impulses even notice it. What remains in your account is the amount designed for current living. This simple system changes your relationship with money. Saving becomes automatic rather than heroic. You do not need to feel disciplined every day. The structure itself carries the responsibility. Over time, this process produces surprising results. Small amounts accumulate steadily. The emergency fund grows. A financial goal slowly becomes visible, and the stress that once accompanied money decisions begins to fade. Because the future is no longer something you hope for, it is something you are quietly building every month. You can begin applying this principle with a very practical step today. Choose a specific percentage or amount of your income to move into savings automatically. Even a small number works. The key is consistency. Set up an automatic transfer that activates the same day your income arrives. Direct this transfer into a clear purpose, such as an emergency fund or a personal goal. Once the system is established, allow it to operate without constant adjustment. Resist the urge to cancel it during temporary emotional moments. Remember that the system exists precisely to protect you from those moments. Over time, the process becomes invisible. Saving money no longer feels like a struggle. It becomes part of the background structure of your life. Motivation can inspire you for a day. Discipline can carry you for a week. But a well-designed system can support you for years. Systems are stronger than motivation. Chapter 13. Consistency is the master principle. Have you ever begun a new habit with excitement and determination, only to watch it slowly disappear after a few weeks? At the beginning, everything feels powerful. You promise yourself that this time will be different. You make plans, set goals, and imagine the results clearly. But as days pass, enthusiasm fades. Life becomes busy. Small interruptions appear. The new habit quietly slips away, until one day you realize you have stopped completely. This pattern is not a failure of character. It is often a misunderstanding of how change actually works. The 13th principle brings all the previous ideas together into one powerful truth. Progress depends more on consistency than on intensity. You do not need perfect effort every day. You need steady effort repeated over time. One small step taken every day creates far more change than occasional bursts of energy. The mechanism behind consistency is simple but powerful. Repetition builds momentum. Momentum shapes identity, and identity gradually shapes destiny. When you repeat a small behavior again and again, your mind begins to accept it as part of who you are. At first, the action feels deliberate. Later, it becomes natural. Eventually, it becomes automatic. This transformation happens quietly, often without dramatic moments. Imagine someone who decides to improve their health. Instead of trying to transform their entire lifestyle at once, they choose a very small habit. Each day they walk for 15 minutes. At first, the action feels almost insignificant. It does not look like a major life change, but the person repeats the walk every day. Weeks pass. The habit becomes familiar. The body begins to expect the movement. After several months, the person realizes something surprising. The small daily walk has expanded. Energy levels improved. Confidence increased. Other healthy habits began appearing naturally. The small action created momentum that spread into other areas of life. This is how consistency works. It quietly builds strength through repetition. You can apply this principle by choosing one of the ideas from this audiobook and committing to practice it for the next 4 weeks. Do not attempt to master everything at once. Choose one principle. Perhaps it is pausing before speaking. Perhaps it is using the 24-hour rule before spending. Perhaps it is practicing the breathing exercise before difficult conversations. Whatever you choose, keep the commitment simple and realistic. Your goal is not perfection. Your goal is repetition. Each day, perform the action once, even if it feels small. Over time, this daily practice builds a new pattern, and that pattern slowly reshapes the way you live. Many people search for a completely new life. They imagine that transformation requires dramatic reinvention, but real change usually grows from something quieter. A new habit practiced consistently. You do not need a new life. You need a new habit. You have now traveled through a simple but powerful journey. It began with the mouth, moved into the mind, flowed through your mood, and finally reached your relationship with money. At first, these areas may have seemed separate. Speaking, thinking, feeling, and spending often appear like different parts of life. But when you look closely, you begin to see that they are deeply connected. They form a chain of influence that quietly shapes the direction of your days. Words create relationships. Relationships influence your thoughts. Thoughts shape your emotional climate. Your emotional climate affects your decisions. And many of those decisions eventually appear in the way you use your money. Then the cycle begins again. The way you spend shapes your lifestyle, and your lifestyle influences the conversations, thoughts, and emotions that fill your life. This means that small moments of control in one area can ripple through many others. When you pause before speaking, you protect a relationship. When a relationship stays healthy, your mind carries less tension. When your mind feels clearer, your mood becomes steadier. When your mood is balanced, you are far less likely to make impulsive financial decisions. Suddenly, a simple pause before speaking has influenced far more than a conversation. It has influenced the entire chain that shapes your daily life. Throughout this audiobook, you explored 12 principles that help you regain control of that chain. You learned how to pause before words escape your mouth. You practiced speaking clearly instead of speaking endlessly. You saw how replacing judgment with observation can transform difficult conversations. You learned to catch automatic thoughts before they control your emotions. You focused attention on what you can actually influence, instead of exhausting yourself over what you cannot control. You reshaped your self-talk into short sentences that guide action instead of doubt. You practiced returning to your breath when emotions rise. You separated feelings from behavior so that emotions inform your life without controlling it. You discovered the power of healthy boundaries that protect your energy. You examined the relationship between emotions and spending. You saw how budgeting can guide freedom rather than restrict it. And finally, you learned how systems and consistency quietly build the life you want over time. Each principle may seem small on its own. None of them requires dramatic effort. None of them demands perfection. But together, they create something powerful. They return authority over your life back to you. The central message behind everything you have heard can be expressed in a single idea. Self-control is one of the most reliable forms of freedom a person can build. Many people imagine freedom as the absence of limits. They believe freedom means doing whatever you feel in the moment. But that kind of freedom often leads to chaos. Words spoken in anger damage relationships. Thoughts believed too quickly create anxiety. Emotions acted on impulsively create regret. Money spent without awareness creates stress. What looks like freedom in the moment often becomes a form of quiet imprisonment later. Real freedom looks different. It appears in the ability to pause. It appears in the ability to choose your response instead of reacting automatically. It appears when your words are guided by intention, when your mind questions exaggerated thoughts, when your emotions are acknowledged without controlling your actions, and when your money follows a plan that protects your future. You do not need to apply every principle perfectly. You only need to begin with one small moment. Tomorrow morning, choose one action, just one. Before speaking, pause for a moment. Before spending money, pause for a moment. Before reacting emotionally, pause for a moment. That single pause is where control begins. It is the space where awareness replaces impulse. It is the moment where your future quietly becomes stronger than your habits. Practice that one pause tomorrow. And within that pause, your life begins to move in a direction that feels calmer, clearer, and more intentional. Everything you have learned in this audiobook begins in that one small moment.